A millionaire, blinded by his own cruelty, abandons his defenseless daughter in a gloomy forest. But the unexpected loyalty of a parrot, the sole witness, becomes the girl's last hope when the bird seeks help from a truck driver. The oppressive silence of the forest, which moments before had swallowed the girl's muffled cries, was broken only by the frantic beating of Lauro's wings. The parrot, shimmering emerald green against the dark green foliage, flew as if his life depended on it, and in a way it did. The image of little Maria, her eyes wide with terror, her hands outstretched in a desperate plea as her father, a cold and indifferent figure, walked away without looking back, was etched into his bird's memory. He didn't understand human cruelty, but he felt the urgency, the injustice. With each beat of his wings, Lauro repeated in a shrill, desperate tone the last words he had heard, phrases the girl and her mother used to say playfully, but which now carried the weight of death. "Help! Daddy, no! The girl!" His voice, usually cheerful and imitative, was distorted by panic, a sharp cry that tore through the dense forest air. He didn't know where to go, only that he needed to get away from that horror, to where there were others, to where there was hope. A few kilometers away, on the winding road that cut through the woods, Pedro, a truck driver in his early 40s, was fighting off sleep and monotony. The afternoon sun beat down on the asphalt, and the constant rumble of his old Scania's engine was the only soundtrack to his journey. He had been on the road all night, carrying a load of fruit to the capital, and his thoughts drifted between the next stop for strong coffee and missing his family. The landscape was always the same, trees and more trees, a monotonous green stretching as far as the eye could see. Suddenly, an emerald green blur burst from the woods, flying erratically and low, almost scraping the truck's windshield. Pedro slammed on the brakes, his heart pounding. "What the hell?" he mumbled, startled. The bird, a large, showy parrot, landed awkwardly on the shoulder of the road, a few meters from the stopped truck. He seemed disoriented, but his small, intelligent eyes fixed on Pedro with unusual intensity. Before Pedro could even process the scene, the parrot opened its beak and let out a sequence of clear, desperate words that echoed in the silence that followed the truck's sudden stop. "Help! Daddy, no! The girl!" Pedro blinked, incredulous. He had seen parrots talk, of course, but never one with such vehemence, with so much pain. And the words, "Daddy, no! The girl!" It wasn't just any phrase. It wasn't a good morning or a Polly wants a cracker. It sounded like a genuine plea for help, a supplication. "Hey, buddy, what's going on?" Pedro asked, rolling down his window. The parrot, Lauro, flapped his wings again, flying a little closer to the truck as if wanting to make himself better understood. "Help! Daddy, no! The girl!" he repeated, now looking at the forest from which he had come, and then at Pedro, in a movement that seemed to indicate a direction. A pang of apprehension chilled the truck driver's stomach. That region was isolated, and the idea of a pet parrot, so articulate, repeating those phrases in the middle of nowhere, was disturbing. It wasn't something to be ignored. Pedro's fatigue was replaced by a sudden surge of adrenaline. He turned off the truck's engine, the forest's silence once again enveloping everything, except for Lauro's insistent squawk. "Are you serious, little bird?" Pedro mumbled to himself. But his eyes were already scanning the dense wall of trees. That parrot wasn't there by chance, and those words weren't a joke. Something was terribly wrong. There was a girl, and a father who apparently didn't want to be a father. With a heavy sigh, Pedro opened the cabin door. The dirt ground beneath his feet seemed to call him into the darkness of the forest. Lauro flew a little ahead, landing on a low branch, and turned his head as if waiting. The race against time had begun, and Pedro, a simple, hard-working man, was about to be dragged into the center of a cruelty he never would have imagined. "All right, little bird, let's go," Pedro mumbled, more to himself than to the parrot. Incredulity still wrestled with the growing sense of urgency. He grabbed the flashlight he kept in the cabin, even though the sun was still high, and a multi-tool knife, purely by instinct. The forest, seen up close, was even denser and more intimidating. Tall trees formed a canopy that filtered the sunlight, creating a play of shadows that seemed to swallow anyone who ventured there. The smell of damp earth and decaying leaves was strong, and the hum of insects filled the air. Luro didn't wait. With a sharp squawk, he flew into the woods, landing on another branch a little further ahead, and then looked back as if saying, "Come!" Pedro hesitated for a second, his self-preservation instinct screaming at him to return to the safety of the truck, to the logic of the real world. But the image of the parrot's desperate eyes and the echo of the words, "Help! Daddy, no! The girl!" in his mind propelled him forward. "Hey, wait up!" he called, entering the vegetation. Dry branches crackled under his boots, and with each step, the road and the truck grew more distant, more unreal. The forest closed in around him, and the silence, occasionally broken by a bird's song or the rustling of leaves, was oppressive. Luro continued to guide him, flying in short bursts, always waiting for Pedro to catch up. The parrot seemed to know exactly where to go, a determination that surprised the truck driver. "Are you sure about this, buddy?" Pedro asked, panting as he dodged a tangle of vines. The parrot merely repeated with more intensity, "The girl! Help! Daddy, no!" With every meter, Pedro's apprehension turned into real fear. This wasn't a game. This was serious. He began to call out, his voice a little hoarse. "Hello? Is anyone there? Girl? Maria?" The name Maria came to his mind, perhaps by association with innocence, or because the parrot seemed to be crying out for a child. No answer. Just the echo of his own voice getting lost in the green immensity. Suddenly, Luro landed on a low bush and began flapping his wings frantically, pointing his beak at the ground. Pedro approached, his heart pounding in his chest. Among the dry leaves, there was something that didn't belong in the forest, a small pink shoe, dirty with earth, with an untied bow. It was unmistakably a child's. A shiver ran down Pedro's spine. There was no more doubt. There really was a girl there, and she was in danger. Anger began to bubble up inside him, a cold fury against the father the parrot mentioned. What kind of monster would do such a thing? "My God," Pedro whispered, carefully picking up the little shoe. He felt the weight of responsibility, the weight of that child's life in his hands. Time was running out. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, and the forest would become even darker, more dangerous. Luro, as if understanding the gravity of the discovery, flew again, now with more urgency, entering an even denser part of the woods. "Help! The girl! Daddy, no!" he cried. And this time, Pedro swore he heard a faint, almost inaudible sound coming from the direction the parrot indicated. A muffled cry, a whimper of despair. Pedro clutched the little shoe in his hand, determination etched on his face. He wasn't a hero, just a truck driver. But in that forest, at that moment, he was that girl's only hope, and he wouldn't give up. "I'm coming, little one!" he shouted, running after Luro, his flashlight swinging, pushing through the unforgiving vegetation. The race against time had become a desperate fight for life. The small pink shoe, now clutched in Pedro's dirty hand, was irrefutable proof. There was no more room for doubt or for the logic of the civilized world. Here, in the heart of that wild forest, a child was lost, or worse, abandoned. The anger bubbling within Pedro transformed into an engine, propelling him forward. "I'm coming, little one!" he shouted, his voice hoarse, echoing among the trees. Luro, as if understanding the urgency, flew faster, his squawks of "Help! The girl! Daddy, no!" mingling with the rustling of leaves and the snapping of branches under the truck driver's feet. Pedro ran, stumbling over exposed roots and dodging treacherous vines. His flashlight swung, creating an erratic beam of light that danced in the shadows, deepening with the setting sun. The forest air, once merely damp and earthy, now felt heavy, laden with a palpable tension. Every step was a battle against the unforgiving vegetation, but the image of the little shoe in his hand and the faint sound he swore he'd heard, a muffled cry, a whimper, were the fuel that kept him moving. "Maria! Where are you, Maria?" he called, his voice losing strength but gaining desperation. The parrot, who seemed to have an internal compass for suffering, landed on a higher branch, pointing his beak towards a clearing a little further ahead, where the vegetation seemed less dense, but darkness was already beginning to settle. "Help! The girl!" Luro repeated, with an intensity that made Pedro's heart clench. And then Pedro heard it again, this time clearer, unmistakable. A child's cry, faint and intermittent, as if the child was exhausted from crying so much. It was a soul-cutting sound, a pure lament of terror and abandonment. Pedro's anger gave way to a sharp pain, an overwhelming compassion. What kind of monster would leave a child alone to die like this? The father Luro mentioned was a demon. He quickened his pace, ignoring the ache in his muscles and the scratches that leaves and branches left on his arms. The clearing opened before him, and the dying sunlight revealed a scene that froze the blood in his veins. Huddled beneath the gnarled root of a centuries-old tree was a little girl, small, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, her blonde hair matted and her face streaked with dirt and tears. She was hugging her knees, trembling, her eyes wide with terror, fixed on an invisible point in the growing darkness. One of her little shoes, the pair to the one Pedro held, was lost somewhere. She wore a light dress, now crumpled and soiled. Luro flew and landed on Pedro's shoulder, flapping his wings and repeating in a softer tone, almost a whisper, "The girl. Maria. Daddy. No." Pedro stopped a few meters away, his heart hammering. He knelt slowly, trying not to frighten her further. "Hello, little one," he said, his voice trying to be as calm and gentle as possible, but trembling slightly. "I'm Pedro. I've come to help you." The girl lifted her head, her blue eyes, previously filled with terror, now fixed on him with a mixture of fear and a glimmer of hope. She said nothing, just continued to tremble. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" Pedro asked, slowly extending his hand, showing her the pink shoe. "I found this. It's yours, isn't it?" The girl's eyes widened a little more at the sight of the shoe. A solitary tear rolled down her dirty cheek. She nodded, an almost imperceptible movement. "What's your name, little one?" Pedro asked, his voice soft. Maria," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible, a thread of sound barely breaking the oppressive silence of the forest. "Maria?" Pedro repeated with a sad smile. "I'm Pedro, and this is Luro." He pointed to the parrot on his shoulder, who gave a small squawk. "He brought me to you. He's a good friend." Maria looked at the parrot, a spark of recognition in her eyes. "Luro," she murmured, and for an instant, the terror on her face seemed to lessen, replaced by a brief memory of something familiar, something safe. Pedro felt immense relief. She recognized him. Luro was the bridge. "That's right, Maria, Luro. He's here to protect you, and so am I. We're going to get you out of here, okay?" The sun had already completely disappeared, and the forest's darkness was becoming almost absolute. Pedro's flashlight was the only source of light, creating a small circle of safety amidst the menacing vastness. The night's cold was beginning to set in, and Pedro knew they couldn't stay there. "Can you walk, Maria?" he asked, extending his hand again. "Let's get out of here. Your father, he's not here. But I am." The lie about her father hurt Pedro's mouth, but he knew it wasn't the time for the brutal truth. The important thing now was to get her out of that hell. Maria hesitated for a moment, looking at Pedro's outstretched hand, then at Luro, and finally, at the surrounding darkness. Fear was still present, but the promise of help, the presence of a human and familiar face, seemed stronger. Slowly, she extended her small, dirty, cold hand, and Pedro held it firmly, feeling the fragility of the life he now had the responsibility to save. The race against time hadn't ended. It had merely shifted gears. Pedro stood up, pulling Maria with all the gentleness he could muster. The girl, still trembling, clung to his hand with surprising strength for her size. "Come on, little one. I'll carry you for a bit," he said, and without waiting for an answer, he lifted her into his arms. Maria was light, almost ethereal, but the weight of her fragility and trauma was immense. She nestled her head on Pedro's shoulder, the smell of earth and fear clinging to her clothes. Luro, faithful, flew to Pedro's opposite shoulder, a point of light and familiarity in the growing darkness. The forest, once merely challenging, now became hostile. Pedro's flashlight, the only source of light, barely managed to pierce the dense foliage. Every step was a battle. Branches scratched his legs. Treacherous roots threatened to make him fall. Maria, clinging to him, sobbed softly now and then, a sound that broke Pedro's heart and fueled his silent fury against the man who had abandoned her. "Don't worry, Maria. We're almost there," Pedro whispered, more to himself than to her, as he tried to keep his voice steady. He felt the girl's body tremble against his, and with each tremor, the need to get her out of there became more urgent. The night's cold was beginning to bite, and he could feel her skin was icy. Luro occasionally let out a softer, "Help! The girl!" almost a lament, as if understanding the gravity of the situation and the need for discretion. But each time Maria heard the parrot's familiar voice, she clung a little tighter to Pedro, a sign that the bird's presence was a small comfort in her private hell. Pedro didn't know how long he walked. It felt like an eternity. His muscles burned, sweat streamed down his face, but the image of the pink shoe and the girl's muffled cries were the fuel that kept him from stopping. He guided himself by instinct and a vague memory of the path he had taken, but the darkness made everything unrecognizable. Suddenly, a stronger beam of light. It wasn't his flashlight, it was the light from his truck, which he had left with its headlights on, almost like a beacon of hope. A sigh of relief escaped Pedro's lips. "Maria, look, we're almost there!" he exclaimed, his voice hoarse with emotion. Maria lifted her head, her eyes wide, and saw the light. A small sound, almost a whimper of hope, escaped her. Pedro quickened his pace, ignoring the pain. Finally, the vegetation began to thin, and they stumbled out of the woods onto the roadside. Pedro's truck was there, imposing and safe, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Carefully, Pedro opened the passenger door and placed Maria in the seat, which seemed gigantic to her. He turned the heater on full blast, feeling the immediate relief of warmth in the chilly air. Maria huddled in the seat, still trembling, but her eyes no longer held the same terror. Luro flew to the dashboard, observing the girl with a tilt of his head. Pedro took a bottle of water and a packet of biscuits from his backpack. "Do you want some water, Maria? And a biscuit?" he asked softly, extending them to her. She looked at the bottle, then at him, and finally at Luro. With a small nod, she took the bottle with her two small, dirty hands, brought it to her lips, and drank eagerly. As she drank, Pedro took out his cell phone. His hand trembled slightly as he dialed the police number. The operator's voice sounded strangely calm and distant. "Hello? Federal Highway Police. How can I help you?" I found a child. Abandoned in the forest," Pedro said, his voice choked with emotion and suppressed anger. "I'm Pedro, a truck driver. I'm on BR 101 at kilometer 120, near that big farm, Fazenda Esperanza. There's a girl here, she's alive, but she was abandoned by her father." On the other end of the line, silence hung for an instant before the operator's voice, now more serious, replied, "Sir, please remain calm. Can you repeat the location and what happened? Pedro repeated, the story coming out in bursts, punctuated by indignation. He looked at Maria, who was now eating a biscuit, her eyes fixed on Luro. The small pink shoe was still clutched in Pedro's hand. He knew that the battle to rescue Maria from the forest was over, but the war to unmask the monster who abandoned her was just beginning. He wouldn't rest until justice was served. Sir, please remain calm. Can you repeat the location and what happened? The operator's voice, now more serious, cut through the air. Pedro took a deep breath, trying to control the torrent of emotions that overwhelmed him. Anger, relief, and a profound sadness for the little life beside him. BR 101, kilometer 120 southbound, near Fazenda Esperanza. I'm Pedro, a truck driver. Her parrot, Luro, alerted me. He was on the road repeating, "Help the girl, Daddy, no!" I followed him into the woods and found her. She was abandoned, alone. Her father left her there to die. The last sentence came out with a venomous tone, indignation bubbling. On the other end, the operator typed hurriedly, "Understood, Mr. Pedro. We are sending a patrol car immediately, and a rescue team." "You said Parrot? Is he the girl's?" "Yes, he's hers. He's the only familiar thing little Maria has here," Pedro replied, looking at Luro, who was on the dashboard, observing the girl with a tilt of his head. Maria, in turn, continued to drink the water, her eyes fixed on the parrot, as if seeking confirmation from him that everything would be all right. The half-eaten biscuit lay in her lap. "All right, can you see the girl now? Is she injured? Can she speak?" "She's very scared, but doesn't seem to have serious injuries. She's cold and dirty, but alive." She whispered her name, Maria, and she recognized Luro. "But I think she's in shock. Doesn't talk much," Pedro explained, his voice softening as he looked at the girl. "Okay, Mr. Pedro, the patrol car should arrive in about 15 to 20 minutes. Please do not leave the location. Keep the girl warm and try to calm her. Do not leave her alone for any reason. And the parrot, if he is a pet, is important for her well-being. Keep him close. You can count on it. I'm not going anywhere, and Luro won't leave my side," Pedro assured, his hand still clutching the small pink shoe, a tangible reminder of the cruelty he had witnessed. He hung up the phone, feeling the weight of responsibility and the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. He turned to Maria, who now looked at him, her blue eyes still wide and filled with a shadow of fear, but with a new curiosity. "The police are coming, Maria. They're going to help you," Pedro said, trying to smile reassuringly. "You're safe now." Maria didn't respond, but clutched the biscuit in her small hand. Luro flew from the dashboard to Pedro's shoulder, rubbing his head against his cheek. "Maria, safe," he squawked softly, as if echoing Pedro's words. The waiting time felt like an eternity. Pedro tried to talk to Maria, asking about the parrot, about what she liked to do, but she only responded with nods or almost inaudible whispers. With each passing minute, Pedro's anger at the girl's father grew. What kind of man could do that? Abandon such a fragile and innocent creature to her own fate? Finally, on the horizon, blue and red lights flashed, tearing through the night's darkness. The sound of the siren, once distant, grew louder, and soon a federal highway police patrol car stopped behind Pedro's truck. Two police officers, a man and a woman, quickly got out, their expressions serious. "Mr. Pedro?" the older officer asked, approaching the truck's window. Pedro opened the door, and Maria huddled even further into the seat. "That's me. The girl is here." The female officer, with a gentler look, leaned in to see Maria. "Hello, little one. Are you okay?" Maria merely hid her face in Pedro's shoulder, who turned to shield her. "She's very scared, doesn't want to talk much." Pedro began to recount everything again, from the moment he saw Luro on the road until he found Maria in the clearing. He showed them the pink shoe. Luro, on Pedro's shoulder, let out a, "Help! The girl! Daddy, no!" That made the officer's eyes widen. "The parrot? He really said that?" the female officer asked, shocked. "He was my guide. He led me to her," Pedro confirmed, feeling a pang of pride for the bird. "He's the witness." The officers exchanged glances. The story was unbelievable, but the traumatized child and the talking parrot were irrefutable proof. "We need to take her to the hospital for a checkup," the older officer said, his tone softer now. "And then Child Protective Services will be notified. Mr. Pedro, you'll have to come with us to give a formal statement." Pedro nodded, without hesitation. "I will. I won't rest until the monster who did this to her pays, and I know who it is. Fazenda Esperanza." The parrot said, "Daddy, no. Her father is the owner of that farm." The female officer noted down the farm's name. "That's a very serious accusation, sir, but we will investigate thoroughly. First, the girl's safety." Carefully, the female officer tried to approach Maria. The girl, however, clung to Pedro with all her might, her eyes filled with panic at the sight of the uniformed strangers. "It's okay, Maria," Pedro whispered, stroking her matted hair. "They're friends. They're going to help you. I'll go with you." Luro flew to the female officer's shoulder, startling her a little, but he merely repeated in an almost pleading tone, "Maria, Daddy, no." The scene was surreal, but the message was clear. That parrot was the voice of a child who couldn't speak, the living proof of a heinous crime. Pedro knew that the battle to rescue Maria from the forest was over, but the war to unmask the monster who abandoned her was just beginning. And he, Pedro, the truck driver, would be Maria's loyal squire in this fight for justice. "They're friends! They're going to help you! I'll go with you!" Luro, as if understanding the tension, flew from Pedro's shoulder to the female officers, startling her a little, but he merely repeated in an almost pleading tone, "Maria, Daddy, no." The female officer, a middle-aged woman with tired but kind eyes, looked at the parrot, then at the girl huddled in Pedro's arms. "Mr. Pedro, we need to take her to the nearest hospital for a full checkup. She needs medical and psychological attention," the older officer said, his voice softer now. "You will have to come with us to give a formal statement." "I will. I'm not going anywhere without her. And I won't rest until the monster who did this to her pays, and I know who it is. Fazenda Esperanza." The female officer wrote down the farm's name in her notepad, her expression serious. "First, the girl's safety. We need to get her out of here." With Pedro's help, the female officer managed to persuade Maria to get out of the truck. The girl, still clinging to Pedro's hand, was carefully placed in the patrol car. Luro, faithful, flew to the back seat and nestled near Maria, who immediately sought comfort in his presence. Pedro sat in the front, beside the driving officer, while the female officer stayed in the back with Maria and Luro, trying to calm her with soft words and a thermal blanket she took from the first aid kit. The siren was not turned on, so as not to frighten Maria further, but the patrol car quickly drove off along BR 101. The silence inside the car was heavy, broken only by the officer's whispers and occasionally by Luro's, "Maria, safe." Pedro looked at the road ahead, the patrol car's lights cutting through the darkness. His mind was racing. The image of Maria in the forest, the pink shoe in his hand, Luro's voice. Everything replayed in his head. He felt a mixture of relief at having found her and a growing anger at the man who had abandoned her. "Mr. Pedro, you said the parrot said, 'Daddy, no?'" the female officer in the back asked, breaking the silence. "Yes. The girl! Daddy, no!" "That's how I knew something was wrong. He guided me to her," Pedro explained, his voice firm. "He's the only eyewitness, besides Maria herself. The officer at the wheel shook his head, incredulous. I've never seen anything like it. A pet saving a child. It's extraordinary. Pet, he's her family. The only one left, it seems, Pedro retorted, his tone laden with bitterness. Maria, in the back seat, turned her head and looked at Pedro, as if understanding every word. Her eyes, once filled with dread, now held a spark of trust. She was still in shock, but Pedro and Luro's presence seemed to be an anchor amidst the chaos. The nearest hospital was about 30 minutes away. During the journey, Pedro mentally replayed everything that had happened, preparing himself for the statement. He knew the story would be hard to believe, but he had Luro and Maria herself as proof. The small pink shoe still in his pocket was a constant reminder of his promise. He wouldn't rest until justice was served. The war to unmask the monster who abandoned her was just beginning, and Pedro, the truck driver, would be Maria's loyal squire in this fight. The Federal Highway Police patrol car cut through the darkness of BR 101, its headlights tearing through the night fog. Inside the car, a heavy silence hung, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional whispers of the female officer who was trying to calm Maria in the back seat. Pedro, in the passenger seat, felt the weight of that silence. His eyes were fixed on the road ahead, but his mind was in a whirlwind. The image of Maria, small and vulnerable, in the forest clearing, mingled with the fury he felt for her father. That man, a millionaire, who had discarded his own daughter as if she were trash. The promise he had made to himself, not to rest until justice was served, echoed in his chest, a silent vow. Maria, in the back seat, was huddled under the thermal blanket the female officer had given her, her eyes still wide and distant, fixed on some invisible point. Luro, on her shoulder, occasionally rubbed his head against the girl's cheek, a silent gesture of comfort that seemed to be Maria's only anchor at that moment. Maria. Safe. He squawked softly, like a mantra, his voice hoarse and gentle. The attentive officer observed the interaction, the incredulity still visible on her face at that surreal scene. Mr. Pedro, are you sure about the farm's name? Fazenda Esperanza, the officer at the wheel asked, breaking the lingering silence. Absolutely. The girl. Daddy. No. And then, when he guided me, he said the farm's name. Fazenda Esperanza. Daddy. No. Pedro repeated, his voice filled with conviction. He's the only witness who can speak, besides Maria herself, who is still in shock and unable to express herself. The female officer in the back nodded slowly. It's a story, unprecedented. But the evidence is here, with us, the girl, the parrot. And your story, Mr. Pedro. It's all very strong. Pedro felt a shiver. The story was unbelievable, he knew, but it was the truth, and he was determined to make it heard, to be believed. He looked back at Maria. The girl, as if sensing his gaze, turned her head and looked at him. There was a fragility in her blue eyes, but also a spark of recognition, of a newfound trust that Pedro felt as an immense responsibility. He gave her a small smile, trying to convey security and the promise that he wouldn't abandon her. The 30-minute drive felt like an eternity. Finally, city lights began to appear on the horizon, and soon the police car turned into a hospital entrance. The building's white, illuminated facade contrasted sharply with the dense darkness of the forest they had come from. The patrol car stopped in the emergency area, and immediately a medical team, previously alerted, approached. A nurse with a gentle smile opened the back door. "Hello, little one. We're going to take care of you now." Maria huddled even further, clinging to the blanket and Luro. Her eyes widened at the sight of the unfamiliar faces and white uniforms. She looked like a frightened fawn. "It's okay, Maria. They're friends. They're going to help you," Pedro said, leaning in to reassure her. "I'll stay close by, I promise." The female officer helped Maria out of the car. The girl, with hesitant steps, still held Pedro's hand tightly, like a shipwreck survivor clinging to the last buoy. Luro, faithful, flew to the nurse's shoulder, startling her a little with the bird's unexpected arrival, but he merely repeated softly, "Maria, safe." "Does he come with us?" the nurse asked, looking at the parrot with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "He's her pet. He's important for the girl's comfort," the female officer explained, understanding the situation. "And he was the one who alerted us to everything." The medical team took Maria inside, with Luro still on her shoulder, while Pedro watched, his heart heavy. The small figure disappearing down the hospital's white, sterile corridors, he felt a sudden emptiness, an overwhelming worry that washed over him. "Mr. Pedro, we need you to come with us to the police station for a formal statement," the older officer said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's standard procedure, but crucial for the investigation." Pedro nodded, his voice choked. "All right, but what about Maria? Can I see her later?" "No, once the doctors evaluate her and Child Protective Services are notified, yes. But now we need all the details from your side," the female officer interjected in a more compassionate tone. "Your story is crucial, so we can act quickly." As he was led to the patrol car again, this time to the police station, Pedro looked back at the hospital entrance that had swallowed Maria. The pink shoe, still in his pocket, seemed to burn against his skin, a constant reminder of the promise he had made. He had fulfilled the first part of his promise, rescuing Maria from the forest. Now, the second, more difficult part began. The fight to unmask the monster and ensure Maria received the justice and security she deserved. He wasn't just a truck driver, he was now the guardian of a terrible truth, and he wouldn't back down. The night was still long, and the road ahead, though different, seemed equally challenging. Maria. Absolute. The girl. Fazenda Esperanza. Daddy. It's a story. Unprecedented. The girl. The parrot. It's all very strong. Pedro felt a shiver. "Hello, little one. It's okay, Maria. They're friends, safe." "All right, but what about Maria? Can I see her later?" "Maria. Absolute. The girl. Fazenda Esperanza. Daddy. It's a story. Unprecedented. The girl. The parrot. It's all very strong." Pedro felt a shiver. "Hello, little one. It's okay, Maria. They're friends, safe, all right. But what about Maria? Can I see her later?" The Federal Highway Police patrol car continued on its way, leaving behind the hospital lights and Maria's tiny figure. Pedro felt a chill in his stomach, a mixture of relief that she was safe and a deep anguish at not being able to be by her side. The pink shoe in his pocket was a weight, a constant reminder of the girl's fragility and her father's monstrosity. The police station was a sober building, with cold lighting that contrasted with the cozy darkness of the night. As they entered, the smell of old coffee and paper hung in the air, and the distant hum of radios and conversations filled the room. Pedro was led to a small room with a metal table and 3 chairs. The female officer, whose name he still didn't know, sat across from him, with the older officer beside her. A third officer, who appeared to be a clerk, prepared a recorder and a notepad. "Mr. Pedro, please sit down," the female officer said, indicating the chair opposite him. "We need you to tell us everything from the beginning, with as much detail as possible." Pedro sat down, his hands resting on his thighs, feeling the rough fabric of his work pants. He took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. The story seemed even more surreal now, under the fluorescent lights of the police station. "All right," he began, his voice a little hoarse. "I was on BR 101, coming back from a delivery in Sao Paulo. It was late, almost dawn, and the road was empty. That's when I saw the parrot." The female officer nodded, encouraging him to continue. "The parrot." Lauro, right? That's right. He was in the middle of the road, flying low, almost getting run over. I stopped the truck, thought he was injured, but he started talking. "Help! The girl! Daddy, no!" Pedro repeated the words, and the incredulity in the officer's eyes was palpable, even if they tried to hide it. He said that?" the clerk asked, lifting his pen from the paper. "Yes, and then Fazenda Esperanza. Daddy, no." He guided me. He flew ahead of me, stopping and waiting. I knew something was wrong. I followed him into the forest, along a trail that was barely visible. Pedro described the density of the woods, the fear he felt, but the growing conviction that he had to follow. He narrated the discovery of the clearing, the sight of Maria huddled, trembling with cold and fear, and the parrot landing on his shoulder. Pedro's voice choked as he described the girl's fragility, the lost shoe, the despair in her eyes. "She was in shock, didn't say anything, just clung to me and the parrot," he continued, the image of Maria nestling against his chest vivid in his mind. "I wrapped her in my jacket, tried to warm her, and then I called the police." The older officer, who had been silent until then, cleared his throat. "Mr. Pedro, we understand this is an extraordinary situation, a talking parrot, guiding a man to find an abandoned child. It's something we've never seen." "I know it sounds crazy," Pedro replied, feeling frustration bubble up. "But it's the truth. The girl is in the hospital. The parrot is with her. They are the proof. Her father, a millionaire, threw her out there like trash. I saw his car, a black Mercedes, leaving the dirt road that led to the farm. He didn't care." The female officer noted down the detail about the car. "Did you manage to see the license plate?" Pedro shook his head. "No, it was dark and I was focused on Maria, but the farm is Fazenda Esperanza. It's a well-known name in the region, a huge property." "All right, we'll check that," the female officer said, her voice more serious now. "Do you have any idea why the father would do this? Any motive?" Pedro thought of the indifference he had heard in the parrot's voice when it repeated, "Daddy, no. I don't know. But the motive doesn't matter. Nobody abandons a child in the forest to die. Nobody." He clenched his fists, his anger at the millionaire rekindling. "He needs to pay for this. Maria deserves justice." The female officer observed him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "Mr. Pedro, your story is the central piece to understanding what happened. It's crucial that you are as precise as possible. What you've told us is serious, and if proven, we will have a case of attempted murder and abandonment of a helpless person against a figure of high financial standing. It won't be easy." Pedro felt the weight of her words. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Millionaires had expensive lawyers and influence, but he wouldn't back down. He had promised Maria and himself. "I understand," he said, his voice firm. "I'll tell everything, as many times as necessary. I won't rest until this man is unmasked and Maria is safe." He touched his pocket, feeling the pink shoe. The night was still long, and the battle for justice was just beginning. He was just a truck driver, but now he was Maria's voice, and his determination was unwavering. Pedro had just finished describing the scene of finding Maria. The silence in the small room was heavy, punctuated only by the soft hum of the recorder. The female officer, Inspector Anna, leaned forward, her gaze fixed on Pedro. "Mr. Pedro, you mentioned Fazenda Esperanza. Do you know who the owner is?" she asked, her voice calm but incisive. Pedro nodded. "I don't know the name, but he's a very rich man. People in the region talk about him. They say he's cold, distant." He hesitated, remembering the parrot's tone. Lauro kept repeating, "Daddy, no," and Fazenda Esperanza. It seems he was trying to give me all the clues. The clerk made quick notes. The older officer, Sergeant Costa, crossed his arms, observing Pedro with an expression difficult to decipher. "And the car, Mr. Pedro. You said it was a black Mercedes. Did you manage to see any details? Any sticker, scratch, anything that would make it unique? It was dark, Sergeant, and I had Maria in my arms, trembling with cold and fear. I only saw the color and model. He was leaving the dirt road at high speed, as if he wanted to disappear from there as quickly as possible, Pedro explained, frustration evident in his voice. But Fazenda Esperanza is large. There can't be many black Mercedes entering and leaving there at that time of night. Inspector Anna nodded. All right. We'll check property and vehicle records in the region. It's a starting point. Now, about Maria. Did you notice any marks on her? Any signs of physical aggression, besides the shock and cold? Pedro shook his head. No. She was dirty. Her clothes torn in some places, but it seemed more from having fallen or dragged herself through the woods. What broke my heart was the fear in her eyes and the way she clung to me, as if I were the only safe thing in the world. He swallowed hard. She's so small, Inspector, so defenseless. We understand, Mr. Pedro. It's a terrible situation, Anna said, her voice a little softer. Child Protective Services have already been notified and are on their way to the hospital. They will ensure Maria has the necessary support and a safe place to stay while we investigate. Sergeant Costa leaned forward. Mr. Pedro, what you've described to us is a very serious crime, attempted murder, abandonment of a helpless person, especially if the father is the one who abandoned her. But you know that without a direct human witness or irrefutable physical evidence of the act, a rich man's defense can be very strong. Luro is the witness, Pedro retorted, his voice rising. He repeats the phrases, he guided me, and Maria is there, in the hospital. She's living proof. They are circumstantial evidence, Mr. Pedro, Anna explained patiently. The parrot might have learned the phrases in another context. The girl might have gotten lost. The defense will try to discredit your story in every possible way. Pedro felt a knot in his throat. He knew it would be difficult, but hearing the reality of the situation stated aloud was disheartening. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And Maria. She didn't get lost. She was abandoned. I'm sure of it. We believe you are telling the truth, Mr. Pedro, Sergeant Costa interjected, his voice firmer now. But the truth and what can be proven in court are different things. We need more. We need to confront this man. Anna picked up a pen and a notepad. Based on your statement and the information about Fazenda Esperanza, we will initiate a formal investigation. Our first action will be to try to identify the farm's owner and contact him. We need to hear his side. Pedro felt a shiver. The idea of that man, the monster who had abandoned Maria, being confronted was both frightening and satisfying. What if he denies it? What if he has an alibi? That's why we need all the details, Mr. Pedro. Every piece of the puzzle. And that's why your courage in following the parrot and rescuing Maria is so important. You are our main witness, Anna replied, seriousness in her eyes. This won't be an easy battle, but we will do everything in our power to ensure justice for Maria. Pedro touched his pocket, feeling the pink shoe, its soft and delicate fabric contrasting with the harshness of the situation. He had promised Maria. He couldn't fail now. The night was long, and the fight for justice was just beginning. He took a deep breath, ready for whatever came. I'm ready, he said, his voice firm, echoing his new and unwavering conviction. Count on me for whatever is needed. The officers exchanged glances. They knew the path ahead would be full of challenges, but Pedro's determination was a powerful asset. The recorder continued to record, capturing not just the words, but the silent strength of an ordinary man who refused to let cruelty prevail. When Inspector Anna finally turned off the device, the click resonated in the small room, which seemed to have shrunk with the intensity of the statement. A heavy silence settled, broken only by the distant hum of the fluorescent lights. "Mr. Pedro, we thank you for your cooperation," Ana said, standing up and extending her hand. "Your testimony is vital. Now, we need to act fast." Pedro shook her hand, feeling the urgency. "What do we do now? Are we going after him?" Sergeant Costa, who had stood up and walked to the window, turned around. "First, we need to confirm the identity of the owner of Fazenda Esperanza. It's a large property, but the records are public. Inspector Ana is already mobilizing the on-call team for this." Ana was already on the phone, speaking in a low, rapid voice. "I need a complete survey of Fazenda Esperanza. Owner, history, registered vehicles, everything. Urgent. Yes, the property on BR 101, near the San Vicente interchange." Pedro observed the officer's efficiency. The machine of justice, slow and bureaucratic, was beginning to move, but he felt a growing impatience. Maria was in the hospital, alone, traumatized. Every minute was precious. "And Maria?" Pedro asked, his voice laden with concern. "Will she be okay? Is the parrot with her?" Ana hung up the phone and turned to him. "Child Protective Services are already at the hospital, Mr. Pedro. They will ensure Maria receives all necessary assistance and security. And yes, Luro is with her. His presence seems to calm her." She paused. "The doctor reported that she is stable, but in shock. There are no signs of serious physical aggression, but the psychological trauma is deep." The news, though expected, hit Pedro hard. The fear in Maria's eyes, the way she clung to him, that wouldn't leave his mind anytime soon. "What will we do when we know who owns the farm?" Pedro insisted. Sergeant Costa cleared his throat. "We will approach him. With your statement and Maria's situation, we have grounds to initiate a formal investigation. He will be summoned to provide clarification." "What if he denies everything?" Pedro asked, frustration bubbling. "He's rich, Sergeant. He has lawyers, influence. He can say Maria ran away, that she got lost, that I'm a madman who invented a story with a talking parrot." Ana nodded, her expression serious. "It's a real possibility, Mr. Pedro, and that's why we need to be meticulous. Every detail you've given us, every inconsistency in his version will be crucial. Maria's shoe, for example. Where did you find it?" Pedro took the shoe from his pocket, its pink and delicate fabric contrasting with the roughness of his hands. "It was near where I found her, in the clearing. It seemed to have fallen off when she was dragged or ran." Ana took the shoe with gloves, placing it in a plastic evidence bag. "This is important. It could be evidence that she was there and didn't get lost somewhere else." At that moment, Ana's phone rang again. She answered, listened attentively, and her expression became even more serious. "Understood. Horacio Brandão, owner of Fazenda Esperanza, known in the region as a very influential agribusiness entrepreneur. He has a history of discretion. And yes, he owns a black Mercedes, S-Class model, last year's." Pedro felt a shiver. Horacio Brandão, the name echoed in his mind, the man who abandoned Maria. "Is he her father?" Pedro asked, his voice tense. Ana looked at Sergeant Costa. "Records indicate he has a minor daughter, Maria Brandão." The confirmation dropped like a stone. The monster had a name. "All right," Sergeant Costa said, his voice firm. "Inspector Ana, prepare the team. We're going to Fazenda Esperanza. Mr. Pedro, you will come with us. Your presence may be important for the initial confrontation." Pedro felt a mixture of fear and cold fury. He was going to face the man who had tried to take his own daughter's life. "I'm ready," he said, his voice hoarse but unwavering. The pink shoe, now sealed as evidence, was a silent reminder of his promise. The confrontation was imminent. The click of the recorder had sealed Pedro's statement, but the real work was just beginning. The name, Horatio Brandão, hung in the air, a heavy shroud over the small police station room. It was the name of the monster, the man who had abandoned his own flesh and blood. "All right," Sergeant Costa reiterated, his voice cutting through the tension. "Inspector Anna, prepare a discreet patrol car. We don't want to alert him prematurely. Your presence is crucial for him to understand the seriousness of the situation." Pedro felt a chill run down his spine, a mixture of dread and cold fury. To face that man, the man he had imagined as a shadow, now had a name, a face, a history of cruelty. "I'm ready," he repeated, his voice firmer than he expected, his promise to Maria echoing in his heart. Anna was already giving quick orders to a younger officer, who nodded and left in a hurry. In a few minutes, an unmarked patrol car, a dark sedan, was ready in front of the police station. The driver, a plainclothes officer, was waiting. The drive to Fazenda Esperança was silent, punctuated only by the hum of the engine and Pedro's heavy breathing. The night was still dark, but the promise of dawn was beginning to paint the horizon with shades of grey and purple. Pedro watched the landscape pass by, the trees blurring, his mind racing in 1,000 directions. He wondered how Maria was, if Laura was still repeating the cries for help, if she would be able to overcome the trauma. He clutched the pink shoe in his pocket, the only physical link to the girl at that moment. Fazenda Esperança emerged imposingly in the pre-dawn darkness. A long palm-lined driveway led to a tall, ornate wrought-iron gate, which opened silently when the police driver identified himself via intercom. The property was vast, with well-maintained gardens and strategically placed lights that revealed a mansion of classical architecture, grand and cold. It was the kind of place that exuded wealth, but which, to Pedro, now seemed imbued with an invisible darkness. The car stopped in front of the main door. A tall, muscular security guard appeared, his surprise barely disguised at seeing Inspector Anna and Sergeant Costa, even in plain clothes. "Good evening," Anna said, her voice calm but authoritative. "We are from the civil police. We need to speak with Mr. Horatio Brandão. It's urgent." The security guard hesitated, visibly uncomfortable. "Mr. Brandão is sleeping. He doesn't receive visitors at this hour." "It's not a visit," Sergeant Costa interjected, his voice grave. "It's a summons. It's in his best interest to receive us now." The mention of the word summons seemed to break the security guard's resistance. He gestured for them to wait and entered the house, leaving the door ajar. Pedro felt his heart pound in his chest. The moment was coming. He was about to face the man. Minutes dragged like hours. Finally, the door opened again. Horatio Brandão appeared, wearing a dark silk robe, his grey hair slightly disheveled, but his posture still haughty. His eyes, initially sleepy, widened slightly upon seeing Pedro, who stood a step behind the officers. A flicker of recognition, or perhaps panic, crossed his face, but was quickly replaced by an expression of irritation and disdain. "What is the meaning of this?" Horatio demanded, his voice hoarse with sleep, but with a tone of someone unaccustomed to being questioned. "Invading my home at this hour, and what is this man doing here?" He pointed at Pedro with a dismissive gesture. "Mr. Horatio Brandão," Inspector Anna began, her voice cold and professional. "We are from the civil police. We are here to investigate a case of abandonment of a helpless person and attempted murder, and we have reason to believe you are involved." Horatio's face paled, but he quickly regained his composure, a forced, cynical smile appearing on his lips. "Abandonment of a helpless person? Attempted murder? What are you talking about? And who is this man? I've never seen him in my life." His eyes, however, couldn't help but dart towards Pedro, who stared at him with an intensity that seemed to burn. "Don't play dumb, Mr. Brandão," Pedro interjected, his voice choked with emotion and suppressed anger. "I'm Pedro, The truck driver who found your daughter, Maria, abandoned in the forest, and I know it was you who left her there." Horacio Brandão let out a short, dry, humorless laugh. "My daughter, Maria, she's at home, sleeping in her room. This man is crazy, and you, police officers, are listening to a delusion?" "No, Mr. Brandão," Sergeant Costa said, stepping forward, his presence imposing. "Your daughter, Maria Brandão, is currently in a hospital in a state of shock after being found by this gentleman in a forest clearing a few kilometers from here. And we have a witness, a very peculiar witness." Horacio's smile faltered. He looked from Pedro to the police officers, his arrogance beginning to disintegrate, giving way to a hint of fear. The night was still long, but the truth, like the light of dawn, was beginning to break through the darkness of Fazenda Esperança. The confrontation had begun. Horacio Brandão, with the forced smile still on his lips, tried to disguise the tremor running down his spine. A witness, at this hour of the morning, who would be so peculiar? He tried to sound mocking, but his voice faltered slightly, betraying a growing nervousness. Inspector Anna stepped forward, her eyes fixed on Horacio's without flinching. "Her name is Luro, Mr. Brandão, a true parrot." And he repeats with impressive clarity phrases like "Daddy, no," "Please don't leave me," and "Dark forest, bad daddy." Phrases your daughter, Maria, probably screamed while being abandoned in the woods. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Horacio's face lost all color. His cynical smile crumbled, revealing an expression of icy panic. He looked from Pedro to the police officers, his arrogance giving way to a palpable fear. This is absurd! An animal! You're basing an accusation on a talking parrot? That's ridiculous! I have the best lawyers. You have nothing!" "We have more than you imagine, Mr. Brandão," Sergeant Costa interjected, his voice grave and unwavering, cutting short Horacio's attempt to regain composure. "We have Mr. Pedro's detailed statement, who found Maria in a state of shock, her shoe as evidence that she was in the clearing, and the fact that Maria, despite the trauma, reacted with terror upon seeing your photo. Furthermore, your black Mercedes was seen on BR 101 near the farm entrance on the night of the incident. Too many coincidences to be ignored." Pedro, who had been observing in silence until then, felt anger bubble up. He took a step forward, his voice choked with emotion and suppressed fury. "Your daughter was freezing with fear, Mr. Brandão, alone in the middle of nowhere, and you, a man who has everything, left her there to die." Horacio staggered back, his haughty posture completely broken, the mask of indifference shattered. I don't know what you're talking about. Maria is a problematic child, always making up stories. She must have run away, gotten lost. I've been looking for her for hours." The lie was so obvious, so desperate, that it sounded pathetic, without any conviction. "No, Mr. Brandão," Anna retorted, her voice sharp and leaving no room for negotiation. "Child Protective Services are already aware of the situation. Maria is under protection and will receive all necessary support, and you will be formally summoned to give a statement at the police station. We have sufficient evidence to initiate an investigation for abandonment of a helpless person and attempted murder." The security guard, who had remained silent and motionless, seemed as shocked as Horacio. The grand mansion, once a symbol of power and untouchability, now seemed like a cage for its owner, the walls echoing the undeniable truth. Horacio tried one last card, his voice choked and almost a whisper. "You can't do this. I am Horacio Brandão. I have influence. I have contacts. This will destroy my reputation." "Your reputation, Mr. Brandão, is the least of our concerns right now," Sergeant Costa declared, gesturing to the police driver, who already had handcuffs in hand. The dry click of the handcuffs closing on Horacio's wrists echoed through the silent room, a sound of inevitable justice. He didn't resist. suddenly looking old and defeated. His eyes met Pedro's one last time, and in them there was no more disdain, only a terrifying emptiness, defeat etched on his face. Pedro watched the scene, a bittersweet mixture of relief and exhaustion. Justice, though delayed, was beginning to be served, but the image of Maria, small and terrified, was still etched in his mind, a wound that would take time to heal. As Horacio was escorted out of the mansion, Inspector Ana approached Pedro. "Thank you, Mr. Pedro. Without you, Maria might not have been found. And without Luro, the truth might have taken much longer to come to light." Pedro nodded, the weight of the pink shoe in his pocket feeling lighter now. "And Maria? Will she be okay?" "She has a long road ahead," Ana replied, her voice softer, filled with empathy. "But she is safe, and Luro is with her. He is a witness, yes, but also a friend, an anchor for her." The patrol car with Horacio Brandon departed, the mansion lights seeming to dim in brilliance, as if the darkness that inhabited it was being carried away. Pedro turned towards the sunrise that was beginning to paint the sky with shades of orange and pink. The night had been long and terrible, but the dawn brought the promise of a new beginning. For Maria, for him, and for the justice that was finally beginning to shine. He was just a truck driver, but he had become the unlikely hero of a story the city would never forget. And he knew that somehow his destiny was now linked to Maria's and the little talking parrots. The battle for justice had been won, but the battle for Maria's healing was just beginning, and he would be there for her.